The deep blue sky of Velmera stretched endlessly above Elliot Carter as he stepped out of the transport shuttle. The air smelled fresh, carrying a hint of something unfamiliar, something alien. He adjusted his travel bag and took a deep breath. This was it, his new job, his new responsibility. Elliot wasn't a diplomat, nor was he a scientist. He was just a cultural assistant, a fancy term for someone who helped aliens understand humans and vice versa. His job this time: assist Princess Syria of Velmera through her upcoming season. He had read the briefings. The season was a biological phase that affected Velmerans, especially the royal bloodline. It was a time when their emotions and instincts became overwhelming, requiring guidance and support. Elliot had been assigned as a neutral presence, someone who wouldn't be influenced by politics or personal interests. Simple enough, right? But as he entered the Grand Palace, he had the strange feeling that he was missing something. Something very important. A job unlike any other. The palace was massive, with shimmering silver walls that reflected the golden light of Velmera's twin suns. Tall alien figures, their skin a mix of deep blues and purples, moved with grace and precision. The Velmerans were a proud species, known for their strong traditions and rigid hierarchy. Elliot was led to the royal chamber, where his real task would begin. Inside, Princess Syria sat on a high-backed chair, her golden eyes scanning him with sharp curiosity. She was tall, slender, and wore a flowing white robe embroidered with symbols Elliot didn't recognize. Her long, silver-blue hair cascaded over her shoulders, shimmering like liquid metal. She didn't look weak or troubled. In fact, she looked perfectly in control. "So, you are the human," she said, her voice smooth, but edged with something unreadable. Elliot gave a small nod. "Elliot Carter, at your service, Your Highness." She tilted her head slightly, watching him. "And you understand what you are here for?" Elliot stood straight. "Yes, I'm here to assist you through the season, to provide stability, and ensure you remain comfortable." At that, Syria let out a soft laugh, but there was something strange about it. "Comfortable," she repeated, as if testing the word. "I see they told you very little." Elliot frowned. He had read every document, every protocol. What was he missing? The weight of an unseen bond. An older Velmeran stepped forward. High Advisor Valen, one of Syria's most trusted aides, cleared his throat. "Human," he said, "you must understand something about the season. It is not just a time of transition for the princess. It is a claiming period." Elliot blinked. Claiming. Syria's gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, he saw something flicker in those golden eyes. Something dangerous, possessive. "During this time, my instincts will demand a caretaker. The one who assists me." She paused, her fingers tapping against the armrest. "Becomes bound to me." Elliot felt the air grow heavy. What did she just say? Bound. Valen continued, his expression unreadable. "Velmeran bonds are not like human contracts. Once formed, they do not break easily. You have accepted this role, so you must be prepared for the consequences." Elliot's pulse quickened. No one had mentioned anything about bonding or long-term consequences. He was here to help, not to be claimed by an alien princess. "Wait," he said, forcing himself to stay calm. "I thought this was just assistance, a professional duty." Syria leaned forward slightly. "To you, maybe. But to my people, and to me, it is much more." Elliot swallowed hard. He had walked into this thinking it was a simple job, but now it sounded like something far more complicated. And Syria's expression told him one thing very clearly. She wasn't going to let him go easily. Elliot Carter stood frozen in the grand chamber, his mind racing with everything Princess Syria had just said. Bound? He was supposed to assist her, not get trapped in some alien tradition. Syria leaned forward, studying him with those piercing golden eyes. There was something calm but firm in her gaze, like a predator watching its prey, waiting for it to understand its fate. "I see you are confused." she said smoothly, tilting her head slightly. "But this is the way of my people." Elliot forced himself to breathe. He had faced diplomatic challenges before, had worked with alien species that had odd customs, but this was something entirely different. "With all due respect, Your Highness," he said, carefully choosing his words, "I wasn't informed that this assistance was permanent." Syria's lips curled into a small, amused smile. "Because if you had known, would you have come?" He had no answer to that. A custom he couldn't escape. The Velmaran High Advisor, Velen, stepped forward. His long robes shimmered as he moved, and his expression was unreadable. "Human, you misunderstand," Velen said. "This is not a prison, nor is it something forced. But you must accept that by stepping into this role, you have already begun the bonding process." Elliot stiffened. "What exactly does that mean?" Syria sighed softly, standing from her throne-like chair. She was tall, standing nearly at his height, and when she moved, it was with a graceful but deliberate slowness. "Velmaran instincts work differently from humans," she explained. "When we enter our season, we must bond with a caretaker. It is a deep biological connection that shapes us during this phase." Elliot exhaled sharply. "And what if I refuse?" For the first time, Syria's expression hardened. "Then the process will be painful," she admitted. "For both of us." Elliot didn't like the sound of that. Valen stepped closer. "This bond will only deepen the longer you remain. The princess will become attached to you in ways you do not yet understand. If you choose to leave now, it must be done immediately." Elliot felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His instinct pulled him to run, to get on the next shuttle and leave Velmera behind. But something about Syria's words, her tone, even the way she watched him, made him hesitate. The first test. Before Elliot could speak, Syria raised her hand. "Enough talk. If he is to stay, he must understand what is expected of him." She gestured to a side door, and two royal attendants stepped inside, carrying a small glowing crystal. The light pulsed, changing colors as they approached. "This is the first step of the bonding process," Syria explained. "It will determine if our connection is already forming." Elliot eyed the crystal warily. "And if it is?" Syria smiled slightly. "Then you won't be able to leave so easily." His stomach twisted. This was a test he didn't want to take. But as the attendants brought the crystal closer, something strange happened. The light, once pulsing faintly, suddenly flared brighter, filling the room with a soft golden glow. Syria inhaled sharply, her eyes widening for the first time. "It's responding. Faster than I expected." Valen nodded, looking at Elliot as if he had just done something extraordinary. "The bond has begun." Elliot felt cold dread creeping up his spine. He hadn't touched the crystal, hadn't spoken any words, and yet it was reacting to him as if he had already made his choice. Syria took a slow step toward him. "Now do you see, human? There is no turning back so easily." Elliot clenched his fists, his heart pounding. What had he just gotten himself into? Elliot Carter stood frozen, watching the glowing crystal pulse with golden light. He hadn't touched it, hadn't even spoken, yet it reacted as if it recognized him. Princess Syria's gaze locked onto him, a mix of curiosity and something deeper, something possessive. The Velmaran High Advisor, Valen, folded his arms, nodding solemnly. "It is decided," Valen said. "The bond has taken root." Elliot's pulse quickened. "No, hold on. I didn't agree to anything." Syria took a slow step forward, her silver blue hair catching the light. "And yet, the bond has chosen you." Elliot swallowed hard. There has to be a mistake. Valen shook his head. "There is no mistake, human. The bond is ancient, instinctive. It cannot be forced, nor can it be undone so easily." Elliot's mind raced. He had only come here for a short-term diplomatic job, something simple, something temporary. Now, it felt like he was being pulled into something far more serious. A claim, a connection, a responsibility. The princess's warning. Syria took another step closer, now just a few feet from him. You feel it too, don't you? She asked softly. Elliot opened his mouth to protest, but something strange was happening. His heart beat in rhythm with the crystal's light. His mind, though still filled with confusion, felt a faint pull toward the princess. It wasn't attraction, not in the way humans understood it. It was something deeper, something unexplainable. Syria's expression softened slightly. If you fight it, it will only cause pain. Elliot clenched his fists. So, what? I have no choice. I'm just stuck with you. For a moment, Syria hesitated, as if struggling with her own emotions. I would never hold you against your will, she said, her voice quieter now. But you must understand. The longer we resist, the harder it will be for both of us. Elliot exhaled, rubbing his temples. This wasn't happening. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He had planned to stay for a few weeks, do his job, and leave. But now, he wasn't even sure if leaving was an option anymore. A court divided. The doors to the chamber burst open, and several Velmaran nobles entered. Their deep blue and purple skin glistened under the golden light as they whispered among themselves, their eyes flickering between Elliot and Syria. A human, one of them muttered. This has never happened before. It must be a mistake. Another hissed. A Velmaran royal cannot bond with an outsider. Elliot felt the weight of their gazes. He wasn't just in an awkward situation. He was at the center of something much bigger. Syria turned to them, her expression unreadable. There is no mistake, she said, her voice firm. The bond has been acknowledged. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Then it must be undone. One of them said, He is not one of us. Elliot felt a small spark of hope. Maybe they could break this bond after all. Maybe there was a way out. But Valen's voice shattered that hope instantly. You know it is not that simple. The bond, once formed, does not break without consequences. Elliot turned sharply. What kind of consequences? Syria's lips pressed into a thin line. Severe pain, mental distress. In rare cases, death. Elliot's breath caught. You've got to be kidding me. Syria met his eyes. I would not joke about such a thing. A decision he wasn't ready for. Elliot's hands curled into fists. He didn't want to be part of this. He wasn't looking for some strange alien connection. And yet, he felt it. That pull, that undeniable link that had started the moment he set foot in the palace. Syria studied him carefully. You may not believe it now, Elliot, but the bond chose you for a reason. He exhaled slowly, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. He had always prided himself on being adaptable, on handling alien cultures without getting too involved. But this was more than just involvement. This was entanglement. And the worst part, he wasn't sure he wanted to fight it anymore. Elliot Carter paced across the royal chamber, his mind spinning. Everything felt unreal. A few hours ago, he had been just a cultural assistant, here to do a simple job. Now he was told he had formed a bond with an alien princess, one that couldn't be undone without serious consequences. He ran a hand through his hair. This couldn't be happening. Syria stood calmly, watching him. She was not impatient, nor did she look amused by his reaction. Instead, there was a quiet understanding in her golden eyes. You are troubled, she said, stepping forward. Elliot let out a sharp breath. Of course, I'm troubled. I didn't sign up for this. I don't even understand what's happening. Syria tilted her head slightly. Then let me explain. The bond's true meaning. She gestured for him to sit, but Elliot shook his head. He wasn't ready to relax. Syria sighed but continued. The bond we share is not a contract. It is not a rule made by my people. It is something deeper, something natural. When a Velmaran enters the season, we must be near someone who can balance us. If that person is chosen, the bond begins to grow. Elliot exhaled, rubbing his temples. But why me? Why not one of your own people? Syria hesitated for the first time. I do not know. The bond does not follow rules. It chooses. Elliot frowned. And if I leave? Syria's eyes darkened slightly. Then you will feel the strain. The further you go, the stronger it will pull. And for me. She paused. It would be worse. Elliot studied her. There was no deception in her voice, no hidden manipulation. This was real to her, a connection neither of them had asked for, but one they couldn't ignore. Escape or acceptance. A sudden knock on the door interrupted them. Velen, the High Advisor, entered with a deep bow. Your Highness, the Council is requesting a decision. Syria straightened. A decision. Valen's gaze flickered to Elliot. On what is to be done with the human? Elliot's stomach tightened. Syria's expression turned cold. He is under my protection. There is nothing to decide. Velen hesitated. Many do not accept this bond. They say it is unnatural, that it must be broken. Syria's eyes flashed. And what do they suggest? That we harm him. That we harm me. The room was silent. Elliot's mind raced. So he wasn't just trapped in this bond. He was a political problem now. He took a deep breath. Let me leave. Syria turned to him sharply. No. Elliot frowned. If the bond is a problem for your people, then I shouldn't be here. Syria stepped closer. You do not understand. If you leave now, the pain will be unbearable. For both of us. Elliot hesitated. The way she said it, there was no anger, no command, only quiet fear. He exhaled slowly. There has to be another way. Velen spoke up. The only way to ease the bond is through acceptance. Elliot tensed. What does that mean? Syria met his gaze, her voice softer than before. It means you must choose to stay. A heavy decision. Elliot's mind spun. Everything in him screamed to run, to leave Velmera and never look back. But something inside him, the bond, or maybe something else, made him hesitate. Syria didn't force him, didn't demand anything. She only watched, waiting for him to make his choice. And for the first time, Elliot realized he wasn't sure what he wanted. Elliot Carter sat in silence, staring at the floor. The weight of Syria's words hung over him like a heavy storm cloud. Stay or leave. Neither choice felt right. If he stayed, he would be bound to Syria, trapped in a connection he never agreed to. But if he left, the bond would tear at both of them, causing pain, maybe even worse. Syria stood across from him, her golden eyes watching carefully. She wasn't demanding anything. She wasn't forcing him to stay. But there was something in her gaze, a quiet plea, a silent fear. Elliot exhaled, standing up. I need time to think. Syria nodded. I understand. But did she? Could she truly understand what it meant for a human to be pulled into something this deep, this unbreakable? He turned to Velen, the High Advisor. I need to step outside. Alone. Velen frowned but nodded. You may. But do not go too far. Elliot needed space, needed to figure out what to do next. But deep inside, he was already forming a plan. He had to escape. A dangerous exit. Elliot walked through the grand palace corridors, nodding to the Velmeran guards as if nothing was wrong. His heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know if leaving was even possible, but he had to try. As he reached the outer gardens, he took a deep breath. Beyond the palace walls, the Velmeran city stretched endlessly. Glowing towers, floating platforms, alien ships flying in the distance. If he could just reach the spaceport, he could get off this planet and return to human territory. But before he could take another step, a voice stopped him. Leaving so soon? Elliot turned sharply. Syria stood behind him, her expression calm but unreadable. Elliot hesitated. I just needed some fresh air. Syria tilted her head. Lying is not necessary. Elliot's chest tightened. She knew. Somehow, she already knew. You feel it too, don't you? Syria asked softly, the bond pulling you back. Elliot clenched his fists. He did feel something, a strange tension in his chest, a weight that seemed to grow stronger the further he moved from her. Syria sighed. Elliot, if you truly wish to go, I will not stop you. His eyes widened. You won't. Syria shook her head. But I ask you this, if you leave, will you be able to live with the pain? Elliot wanted to argue, wanted to insist that it was his choice, his freedom. But the more he stood there, the more he realized something terrifying. His body already knew the answer. The thought of walking away, of leaving Velmera, it wasn't just a choice anymore. It was a battle against something deep inside him. Something that refused to let go. A moment of truth. Elliot swallowed hard. This bond. It isn't normal. Not for a human. Syria stepped closer, her voice gentle. No, it is not. But it is real. Elliot took a shaky breath. And if I stay? Syria's golden eyes softened. Then you stay on your own terms. Elliot looked around. The alien city, the palace, the sky that stretched beyond this world. He had wanted to escape, but now he wasn't sure if he could, or worse, if he even wanted to anymore. Elliot Carter stood in the quiet of the palace gardens, the alien sky stretching above him. He had thought leaving Velmera would be easy. Just a simple step away. A ship, a flight home, and all of this would become nothing more than a strange memory. But now, standing here, with Princess Syria watching him, something inside him held him back. The bond. It wasn't just a feeling. It was real, something pulling at him, something telling him that leaving wouldn't be as simple as he had hoped. Syria's voice was soft but firm. You are still free to choose, Elliot. But understand this, if you walk away, the bond will not fade. It will remain, even across the stars. Elliot clenched his jaw. That's not fair. Syria sighed. It is not about fairness. It is about what is. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling in his chest. I didn't ask for this. Syria took a slow step closer. Neither did I. That stopped him. For the first time, he really looked at her. She wasn't just an alien princess bound by tradition. She was just as trapped as he was. The bond had chosen both of them, not just him. And for a moment, Elliot saw the truth. She wasn't keeping him here because she wanted to control him. She was keeping him here because she was afraid to face this alone. The weight of a decision. Elliot exhaled slowly. If I stay, what happens next? Syria studied him carefully. Then we find a way forward together. Elliot frowned. And if I still don't want this bond? Syria nodded in understanding. Then I will do everything in my power to lessen its effect on you. That surprised him. He had expected her to fight for the bond, to demand he stay as part of some ancient tradition. But instead she was giving him a way out, even if it meant going against her own people. That meant something. Valen, the High Advisor, stepped forward. His expression was neutral, but his eyes held something close to respect. You have shown great strength, human, Valen said. Most would have fled in fear, but you have stayed, and that is worthy of recognition. Elliot let out a dry laugh. I tried to run, remember? Valen smiled slightly. And yet you are still here. Syria remained silent, waiting for his answer. She would not beg. She would not force him. The choice was his. Elliot took a deep breath. He had never believed in fate, never thought the universe had a plan. But something about this bond, about Syria, about Velmera, it all felt too big to ignore. Maybe, just maybe, he was meant to be here. Finally, he spoke. I'll stay. Syria's golden eyes flickered with something unspoken, something close to relief. Elliot straightened, but on one condition. Syria tilted her head. Name it. He took a step forward. I don't want to be a prisoner to this bond. If I stay, it's because I choose to, not because I have no choice." Syria gave a small nod. "Then let us build something new. Not out of tradition, but out of understanding." Elliot nodded. For the first time since arriving, he felt like he wasn't just reacting to this situation. He was taking control of it. And maybe, just maybe, staying wasn't the worst thing after all. Elliot Carter stood at the edge of the palace balcony, staring out at the alien city below. The golden lights of Velmera stretched endlessly into the distance, ships gliding through the sky like silent birds. A few days ago, he had planned to leave, to run away from a bond he never wanted. But now he had chosen to stay. Behind him, Princess Syria stood quietly. She wasn't smiling, but there was something softer in her expression, something almost peaceful. "You have made your decision," she said at last. Elliot nodded. "I have." Syria stepped closer, standing beside him. "Do you regret it?" Elliot thought for a moment. He had spent so much time fighting this connection, trying to resist something he didn't understand. But when he had tried to leave, the weight of it had pulled him back. He exhaled slowly. "No, I don't think I do." Syria's golden eyes studied him carefully. "You do not have to pretend for my sake." Elliot shook his head. "I'm not pretending. I won't lie. I never wanted this. But..." He turned to face her. "Maybe there's a reason this happened. Maybe the bond knew something we didn't." Syria tilted her head slightly, her silver blue hair catching the soft glow of the twin moons. "Perhaps. A new beginning." Valen, the High Advisor, approached, bowing slightly. "The Council has been informed of your decision, Princess. The bond will be recognized." Syria nodded. "And what of the nobles who opposed it?" Valen hesitated. "They remain displeased, but they will not act against you." He glanced at Elliot. "Your choice to stay has earned their respect, human. Many believed you would run." Elliot let out a small laugh. "To be honest, I thought I would too." Syria looked at him, something unreadable in her gaze. "And yet you stayed." Elliot met her eyes. "I did." There was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of understanding. A connection that had started against their will but was now something more. An unexpected future. As the night deepened, Elliot found himself walking through the palace gardens with Syria beside him. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of Velmeran blossoms, their petals glowing softly in the moonlight. "So," Elliot said, glancing at her, "what now?" Syria exhaled, looking up at the sky. "Now we figure out what this bond means, together." Elliot nodded. He had come to Velmera expecting a simple job. Instead, he had found himself tied to an alien princess, bound by something beyond his control. And yet, for the first time, he didn't feel trapped. Maybe this wasn't what he had planned. But maybe, just maybe, it was where he was meant to be.